the casualty numbers that I have been observing from from sources who are not the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense indicate that Russia is taking catastrophic casualties in terms of like their combat effectiveness, their ability to wage war ever again is severely degraded by this invasion. Hi.
Hi, Chelsea.
How's it going?
Chelsea, you now work for NIM, a Swiss company from Neuchâtel, which tries to build the next generation of privacy infrastructure. I looked it up. Your job description is security consultant, or in another source, hardware optimization and security advisor. So what exactly do you do, and what are your goals?
So initially I was a security consultant brought on to NIM. Basically the founder of NIM, an American, Harry Halpin, and a friend of mine reached out to me, I think like last February, and asked me to review a paper, which was the NIM paper, which was essentially the first publication of NIM, basically sort of describing how the crypto system worked. Wanted me to review it, give me my thoughts. I was like, oh wow, like this is actually very fascinating, it's very interesting. Interestingly enough, I came up with a very similar system, like as an idea. I sort of sketched it out while I was in prison in 2016. So, other people have come up with sort of very similar ideas before, but nobody's actually been able to implement a mixnet of this variety and of this scale. So I was brought in as a security consultant, as sort of like an outside, eyes on to the project as it was going through its secondary and tertiary phases of development, and I was an advisor, and I produced a report and a couple of reports, basically outlining my thoughts on sort of where the problems with where problems might arise within the system. After that report was delivered, I think December of 2021, NIM reached out to me and we were talking about the next steps, essentially. So I've been brought on board onto NIM as an advisor for optimization of the hardware, specifically to try to make NIM faster and more secure from a hardware perspective, because I've just been really harping on this. I'm very fascinated about using chips themselves to speed things up into not just software solutions. So it's about making NIM more robust for the long term, and essentially making adjustments to the infrastructure, and also altering the infrastructure of how we think about doing encryption, and how we think about doing mixnets, how we think about doing blockchain, and trying to make things smaller, faster, more efficient, and also having different approaches towards doing these kinds of things. So that's what I've been brought on board to do, is to make things faster and more secure from a hardware perspective.
Yes, the mixnet of NIM aims to provide communication privacy superior to both VPN and Tor.
Correct.
Why is this necessary? And maybe for the amateurs, how does it work? To explain it simple.
So a virtual private, whenever you're online, you typically have different layers of security. So the first layer of security that you have is your HTTP, your connection to, say, a website, right? Now then, obviously in the 1990s and early 2000s, we started to adjust to have an additional layer of security. So that way you would have an SSL connection, which is a secure socket layer connection that encrypts the communication between you and the server that you're connecting to. So it makes your connections safe and secure. Now then, a VPN was supposed to add an additional layer of security. What a VPN allows you to do is allows you to have a secure connection, an encrypted tunnel connection in which packets are flowing through a tunnel, between you and the other person. So the other person sees only the third party and sees only the connection, and then an outside observer can only see a tunnel, a connection tunnel, and you can't see the what is actually inside of the connection itself. Tor is an additional layer to that. What it essentially does is it adds a randomization or anonymization factor to it. So what Tor does is it allows you to have many hops that are randomly selected all throughout the world. So you have this connection that bounces from here to there to there to there and back again. So that way you have a anonymized connection, so you can't see. So it's very difficult to untangle all of the different connections and who's talking to who, because one of the problems with being online and communicating, even with an encrypted connection, is that you can see you can see who you're talking to, when you're talking to when you're sending the message, like how much data you're sending across from each other. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to add this additional layer of anonymity, so that way nobody can see how much data is being flowing between each other through packets on the network. Nobody knows who you're talking to. Nobody can see what you're doing, because all of that metadata can still be used to gather a lot of information about you. And so what NIM does is it adds a shroud to the randomization of movements, essentially allowing for the most secure and untangleable level of security while still being functional. You know, so while you're still able to, you're able to anonymously, using NIM, you are able to anonymously send and receive encrypted packets between you and a recipient and a second person, so from point A to point B, but without anybody being able to see or entangle who's talking to who or anything like that. So that's the whole part. So it's an extension of and in addition to all of the other tools, all of the other privacy tools that we have available today. And the reason why you want to do this is because what has happened is that global surveillance actors used to be able to untangle, like, you know, thinking like the NSA or an internet service provider or some other nefarious agency or something like that, to be able to untangle all of the different connections over Tor. Now then, it's getting cheaper and it's getting easier as the years go by, in order to be able to untangle all these different connections. So because essentially you're shuffling a deck of cards, but you can still shuffle the deck of cards. So what NIM does is it basically takes your deck of cards and it shuffles all of the decks of cards, like out of a whole box of decks of cards.
Okay. So I read a white paper about NIM, and I read in it a lot about Bitcoin. So in the Bitcoin network, everything is transparent, and
yes.
I know privacy is very important to you. So how are these two technologies connected?
Which technologies?
Bitcoin network and the mixnet.
So Bitcoin itself is not directly connected, but some of the underlying elements of Bitcoin are. So there is a ledger component. There is and the mixnet component is actually more accurately coming from Ethereum, which is a separate one. So Ethereum uses the mixnet. That's the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Is Ethereum adds that mixnet layer. Now then, the larger portion, of NIM actually is probably more influenced by Ethereum than by Bitcoin itself. I think that just sort of crypto gets lumped in together. And so there is a ledger component. There is a token component for. It's not really a currency though. It's more for managing and balancing because you need to be able to validate who's talking to who, how long, and determine all of the different points in which packets are being sent across the network. So you have these large nodes that essentially are rewarded for their computational time in order to untangle and allow for these secure communications. So what it essentially does is it allows you to have like a bus pass ticket. Sort of like the more work that you do on the network, the more traffic you yourself are able to allow for your application. So users on the network don't necessarily need to be able to know anything that's going on, but certainly applications and people who are running services on the network will need a certain amount of tokens to be able to sort of load balance across the network, and so that way everybody sort of it sort of makes a level playing field for everybody to be able to send private secure communications, but balance out the amount of computational time and energy, and still reward people for doing that kind of energy.
May I ask what you think about Bitcoin? You once said that you like the Bitcoin technology, but not the Bitcoin community.
Yeah, so I am very much for blockchain and cryptography and this kind of technology. I am not I've never really been. You know, I kind of thought, because I was one of the first users of Bitcoin, and I used Bitcoin in like 2009, so it was like really early. It was like, and I like mined. It was like whenever you could still mine Bitcoin from your laptop, from your MacBook, So it was a very early era of Bitcoin. Yeah, so I played with it. And I was like, oh yeah, this is cute, this is fun, but I didn't see it as being like a viable currency or anything like that. So and I still have some skepticism about like cryptocurrency in general. I kind of think that it is that the kinds of people who are super into cryptocurrency either don't understand the sort of problems that come long term with cryptocurrency in terms of like the validation of the network and sort of like the number of different things that need to be done on the network, and there's a lot of cryptocurrencies that have cryptographic primitives, so to speak, that are the elements of sort of the whole process that are untested, that are unproven, that haven't had the robust cryptographic examination of some of those things. Now, Bitcoin is mature. Like I think that Bitcoin is mature. I think that Ethereum is mature. But a lot of people get into a lot of different bleeding edge tools, and they don't necessarily know that some of those components and those subcomponents that they're borrowing from these different things and these different variations are either they're either insecure, they're either not balanced out economically very well, so that it allows for nefarious actors or bad players on the network to be able to exploit things. It's sort of incentivize people to sort of do these very unfair and uneconomical and unsustainable things that are essentially going to, I think, weed out most of the cryptocurrency field. I think that, but again, I'm not super like, oh my God, crypto, right? But I am super into the subcomponents, the methods, and the tools that are used within a crypto framework. So especially things like validation, things like like balancing of the network, and being able to validate different packets and communications across the network and things. So and that's why I find Ethereum so fascinating. I'm very fascinated by how Ethereum is laid out, how it's sort of been able to incorporate different aspects and elements and things, because while Ethereum is just, it's not just a ledger, it is essentially a ledger that it kind of incorporates all these different ideas and all these different things, and it can be extended. So, that's why we have so many ERCs. That's why we have like ERC 721 with the NFTs and things sort of tacked on there at the last minute.
Let's talk about privacy. A lot of people seem to think they have no problem with surveillance. They say stuff like, I have nothing to hide, or
right.
How could I be of any importance? What's your message to them?
Yeah, you have stuff to hide, and you have stuff that you very interesting stuff going on with you. Like that's what, and I mean, it's become a cliche, but okay, you don't have anything to hide? Well, then give me the password to your email address.
Yes.
That's all I say to people who say that, and they don't, it's like, oh yeah, well, yeah, you do have stuff to hide. You have here's the thing that I like to challenge people is, okay, why do you put a lock on your door? Why do you put a curtain up? Why do you like all of these different things? Like you do have the sense of privacy is a value in itself. And I think that's one of the things that's sort of being lost in our digital society, right? And it's one of the things why we're feeling so exhausted all the time and so tired all the time, especially in the post-pandemic situation where everybody sort of moved online. Because we went from pre-pandemic, era, we had 9% of adults in the United States, Western Europe, and parts of East Asia being extremely online, meaning more than 3 hours a day at a computer screen, online, on social media, or in Zoom calls, or in meetings, or whatnot. That jumped up by 3 times, so it's now 30% of that group of that population is now extremely online, and in so doing, and in so being commodified and having your sort of data commodified throughout this entire process, and sort of making our time and our use of all these tools, the number of clicks that we make, the amount of time that we spend with our eyeballs at watching different things, all of this stuff is being fed into these machine learning algorithms, and it's sort of been commodified in such a way as to enable people, advertisers and things, to be able to, find as much, find ways of being able to get money out of you, essentially. One of the problems that's happened is that people have this sense that their conversation isn't private. That, when they're talking over in a Zoom call, who's listening into this call? Or even just sort of being on screen all the time and not having a one-on-one interaction, because there's sort of fleeting moments where people look away in conversation and things, whereas the camera is always watching, it's always on. And people record conversations and things like that, even just for their own note-taking purposes and things. We're really losing this sort of mental sense of our own privacy and our own sense of self and our own sense of security, which I think is extremely valuable. And one of the reasons why we have a prison system at all, is because by taking that away from people, we punish them. So obviously it's something that people value, right? So that's why I value privacy so much, is because we do have a value of privacy, and we do have a value of self, of our sense of ourselves and our own thing. Even if we have, quote unquote, nothing to hide, we want that feeling of privacy.
Mm-hmm. How do you enter the internet? What's your setup, and what do you recommend to people to have? Do you go in with the Tor browser?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm an atypical user of the internet, but I do. I am not doing a lot in terms of security as much as I used to. Obviously, whenever I was doing more heavy stuff, I needed more security. These days, what I try to do is I try to think about the threat model that I have and the amount of security that I actually need. And so while I'm hesitant to provide my information to certain groups of people or to certain institutions or whatnot, I obviously still use social media, and I still have an email address, and I still have all these different things. What I do is I segregate, and I sort of and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but I separate what the things that I feel are not a big deal, because I live in the United States, I have to pay taxes, so most of my financial information, is going to have to go to the government anyway at some point, so I'm not particularly worried about it. But any private conversations that I have are going to be over Signal or over private Jitsi servers, or some kind of video conferencing service where it's an edge computing type thing. A lot of so I'm a heavy Signal user. I still use a social media, but usually I almost exclusively use a VPN. It can be very difficult to use a VPN, unfortunately, in some places, but I do have a very good VPN, and I have one of my most important things is a password manager. Every single one of my password managers and my two-factor authentication is rotated regularly, and I use a very strong I use extremely strong passwords and things. And obviously those things can be broken, but you're trying to reduce, even whenever something is violated, you're able to sort of rotate through and ensure that if it's segregated to this particular account, and that even if you don't know that it's been compromised, by changing your password frequently, you are able to prevent people from having access to that account by rotating through it.
Also, politicians say they care about data protection.
Yeah.
There are a lot of laws that have been made. They led to a situation where you have to decide about cookies on every new website you visit.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is this annoying for a reason, or is this
Yes.
just other bullshit?
Yeah, it's annoying for a reason. It was GDPR is a good idea, and I said this at the time. I was like, GDPR is a very good idea, but the way it's going to be implemented is going to cause problems, and that's what we've seen. You know, it is essentially enabled people or enabled institutions and organizations to say, well, if I just say no, if I just say no, then I can't use it. So it's sort of forced. You still have to participate in society. I mean, like, I have an Instagram account. I browse on TikTok. I have to provide information. I still have to, you know, like, participate in this way. But you know, I click on the button and I have to choose accept, because there's no other way of getting around it, right? Yes. And even as an American, even though we don't have the GDPR, it has filtered through and that, you know, and enabled us to do that. But it has, even though it is annoying and it isn't really working towards ensuring people's privacy, and it has been sort of beat to death. You know, in terms of like a good idea that's been like implemented in a way to try to make it in order to seem like it's a bad thing. I think that one of the problems that we've had, or one of the good things that we've had, is that people know what cookies are. Because beforehand, people didn't know what cookies, they didn't know they were being tracked, and it does at least enable people to be a little bit more aware of that. Unfortunately, we don't have an education problem about privacy anymore. Like, everybody knows that their privacy is being violated and that they're being surveilled and all this other stuff. And now it's like, what do we do about it?
And when we first talked before, you said you have a lot to say about the current war, current situation in Ukraine.
I do. Yeah.
So what's your side? What's your perspective?
So yeah, so I don't have a side. I mean, I'm an observer. So like, I'm just trying to untangle everything that's going on with Ukraine. I kind of expected it to happen. I didn't, you know, I hedged my bets, because the United States doesn't have a very good. The United States intelligence agencies don't have a good reputation of being very forthcoming to, or honest with the public at large, which is an understatement, at least, especially with Iraq and, you know, weapons of mass destruction and Colin Powell and the 45 minutes. And all this, and all the, you know, WMD intelligence, right? So, you know, obviously I was skeptical, but at the same time, what I was paying attention to was the movements of the United States. Like, how are they behaving internally? And one of the things that you started to see is that around late January, you started to see, oh, well, now the Pentagon is having their senior officers and their senior civilian officials working all night long. So that's what I was paying attention to. That's when I started being like, okay, something's, like, the United States and the UK obviously believe something is about to go down. So that's what I paid attention to. That was my tip-off, was essentially, you know, the famous Pentagon parking lot sort of rule, which is that if you see people still in the Pentagon parking lot after 9 p.m., there's something happening.
Okay, so did you watch that? Or
yeah, well, you know, me personally, I didn't, but I know people who monitor this stuff.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So, you know, and the intelligence agencies and stuff. So yeah, they were working overtime, so that was what I was paying attention to. I was a little surprised at the scale of the invasion. So my gut was what was strategically made sense, which is from Russia's, and I'm saying this not as a justification, but just thinking as Russia for a second, what makes sense from the perspective of Vladimir Putin is to acquire acquire territory that you can control and that you can take over with relative ease and without sort of bringing the entire world against you, or causing a humanitarian disaster, or causing your military to be stuck in a quagmire for years on end, which is the path they chose, right? So by doing this invasion, by not sticking to a smaller invasion of, say, the Donbass, or trying to connect Crimea to the rest of Russia over the land, sort of lowering the amount of border between Ukraine and that Ukraine has with Russia, by not focusing it and sort of just moving all forces in and trying to take Kyiv, which it just seems like the biggest dice. You know, I don't know if any of y'all play D&D, but it seems like it was one of those dice rolls where you just like you have to get a crit, you have to get a D20, like you have to get a 20. So yeah, and you know, and to be fair, if Russian forces had taken Kyiv in 72 hours as planned, we would be having a very different conversation about Russia. We'd be like, oh my gosh, like how could we see, you know, that Russian forces were able to take over Ukraine and cause it to surrender so quickly. Now then, that was a possibility, but it was a very narrow possibility, and they completely missed it. And now they're stuck. They're stuck with causing a humanitarian crisis, engaging their entire military, taking very heavy casualties. I don't care what anybody says about the casualty numbers that Ukraine has been putting out. The casualty numbers that I have been observing from sources who are not the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense indicate that Russia is taking catastrophic casualties in terms of like their combat effectiveness, their ability to wage war ever again is severely degraded by this invasion. So, and you know, like now you see that Russia's essentially pulling out is taking all of their resources, all of their vehicles, all of their weapons from all over Russia and sort of pull it. So that leaves Russia very vulnerable on the on the whole eastern side, and they're a continental-sized nation. So you know, like from the Pacific all the way to Kazakhstan is completely open. Like if somebody wanted to invade them, and they could split the two fronts. You know, we've already seen that Japan has doubled down on their territorial claims over the Kuril Islands. You know, the northern islands of Kuril. So you know, they have opened a Pandora's box of geopolitical madness, and it's very scary. And while I'm very, you know, a lot of people jump to tactical nuclear weapons, right? And they jump to this gigantic, you know, strategic nuclear engagement between two different parties. And I do think that there was a point in time where Russia may have considered tactical nuclear weapons in this moment in which we had these combat operations, like in Ukraine. I think that we've passed that, and it's sort of like the where it would actually be useful from a tactical or strategic perspective. It has dissipated, and they've chosen instead shelling as a different method of sort of softening targets and softening fortified positions held by Ukraine. So that has gone down quite a bit. So I don't think we're in, because of the way the United States and the way Russia has sort of reconstructed their respective militaries, and to a certain extent, most European and NATO countries have done the same. I think that mutually assured destruction, like in the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, is a lot less likely. It's still like a nuclear exchange is still on the table, but I think that the way that that all of the militaries work and think nowadays sort of makes it much more likely that it would be a smaller scale, much more localized engagement, but it would still be absolutely abhorrent and awful and runs the risk, you know. And so you always run the risk of having that mutually assured destruction sort of strategic engagement between two superpowers using nuclear weapons. But I don't think that we are, say, quote unquote, back in the Cold War. I don't think that's sort of like where we are. If anything, the Cold War was a much more stable time than what we're experiencing now.
For me, the extent of the attack was a surprise, but also the extent of the sanctions. I mean, they're unprecedented.
Yes, so, they're unprecedented. Yes.
So I think they will be successful. What do you think?
Who be successful?
The sanctions of the West.
I think ultimately the sanctions the sanctions open up a Pandora's box in themselves, in that it allows like a number of different methods and means have sort of been opened up that we haven't seen before in this kind of thing. And one of the things that Russia and to an extent China have done, being BRIC nations, you know, they've sort of tried to set up alternatives. Alternative payment systems, alternative schemes of being able to process payments, of being able to process bank transactions, of being able to validate ownership of items and things. They've sort of been trying to create alternatives to the quote unquote Bretton Woods, system that exists today with like the IMF. They've been trying to create like the Russians and the Chinese have been trying to create their own version of the IMF and sort of giving loans to potentially client states and things like that. So they haven't been successful, but they were working on that and they were sort of building more robust things. I think that you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more alternatives to Bretton Woods, seeing that that they've sort of opened the door to all these different things as to who determines what. You know, like obviously, like the sanctions are probably going to work in terms of crashing the Russian economy, in terms of really putting pressure on the Russian military's ability to maintain supply, maintain its ability to get fuel, to get ammunition, to be able to replenish its missile supply. And things like that. So the sanctions are going to work in that regard. But my concern with these types of sanctions is that essentially is telegraphing to the world that you need that there are going to be different systems that are going to come up in alternative to SWIFT, in alternative to the IMF, in alternative to the Silicon Valley sort of social media apparatus, which China already has. They already have their own social media system. Russia, we may start to see Russia and similar states start to develop their own social media platforms and cut themselves off from the internet. I think we're going to see more and more of a sort of splitting up of the internet and a closing off of different places and of financial systems as well, where it's separate financial systems, separate currency systems, separate ways of doing trade, which I think is the trend that we're going to start to see, and I think it accelerated that trend. We were already starting to go that way, you know, with BRIC nations sort of like Russia and China and India sort of setting up alternative systems. Where now it's going to really put the gas on that, I think.
There is also not just a war going on, there's also a propaganda war going on, played out in the media. Can you tell something about this, how it's going to play out? Who are the actors?
Yeah, so obviously Russia had a very, very, very successful disinformation campaign in the run-up to the invasion. Obviously,
so in Russia?
No, Russia to the west.
To the west.
So Russia to the Russian propaganda efforts and disinformation efforts have been very successful in the United States and in Western Europe. And in a couple other places as well. So they've been building this apparatus and they've been able to spread misinformation, spread disinformation, incentivize like propaganda, sort of propaganda structures that aren't Russian. So they sort of were able to use Russian influence operations to set up people who would not be associated with Russia, but to sort of spread information and misinformation, spread disinformation and alternative sort of stories and things, and muddle things up and sort of muddle up the political sphere and the political spectrum. And they've done this in a number of different ways. Some are more directly tied to Russia in terms of like, you know, in terms of like spreading misinformation about either what the United States is doing, rightly or wrongly, what the United Kingdom is doing rightly or wrongly, or what NATO is doing rightly or wrongly. But a lot of it, but they've also been. What's interesting is that they've been, sort of goading up the sort of misinformation, disinformation about all kinds of different issues, like race issues in America, like the COVID vaccine stuff. Like they've been very, very, very pinpoint accurate. like influencing and sort of goading up a lot of different controversies. So a vast number of the controversies that we've been seeing online, that have been trending online for the last like 5 or 6 years in the geopolitical space, have been largely impacted, not caused by necessarily, but have certainly been accelerated or made larger through Russian disinformation operations. Now then, this stopped because Russia cut off its internet. So by cutting off its internet at a very weird moment, and also by not having the disinformation actors that they usually are engaged with be aware of the fact that because all of their messaging was that there won't be an invasion. There's not going to be an invasion. It's not going to happen, right? But instead, an invasion happened. So all of the disinformation actors were sort of cut off from their supply of bots and misinformation and disinformation actors that they normally engage with. They were sort of left without any sort of counter to the fact that there was in fact a war that was breaking out. So that gave Ukraine and the United States and NATO a massive advantage in terms of being able to get a narrative out there, in order to get a propaganda narrative out there. And like rightly or wrongly, like at the end of the day, like a lot of information coming out about Ukraine in the days after the invasion was propaganda. Like it may have been true things that were exaggerated or whatnot, but ultimately, it still was very much to shape the narrative and to shape the perspectives and the perception of how the war was going in Ukraine, and to build and to sort of like get everybody to have this coalition come up against Russia, and to really drive it home to people that we should support Ukraine and whatnot. So that was successful. So by having Russian disinformation operations cut off for a little bit, it allowed the rest of the world to sort of have breathing room to engage in, quite frankly, very similar activity in some regards, but it is much easier to do that, against somebody who is being invaded versus somebody who is trying to do an invasion, like we saw with the United States in 2003.
A lot of this propaganda plays out on social media companies.
It does.
Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. They're also deleting a lot of accounts these days and censoring content. Are they doing the right thing, or are they a danger for free speech?
That's a very good question. I hesitate to be like, okay, social media needs to delete these accounts or anything. I definitely don't think that the government should have any role in this kind of censorship or anything like that. And it's very difficult to suss out, especially with how the internet works and how these tools work, what is a disinformation operation and what is misinformation that is impacted by disinformation. And I want to be very clear here what I mean by that. While an account could be associated with, say, a Russian, disinformation operation based out of Russia, what they do is they spread this disinformation, but then they get regular people like you and me to become misinformation actors and spread Russian disinformation, but we don't know that it's disinformation that's been shared, that's been shared by and spread by Russia. So by cutting off those people, and those are real human beings that are essentially being chosen and selected, and so they're not sieving out like the distinction between Russian disinformation actors, because there is that blurry line, and they've utterly failed in this regard to be able to make that distinction.
So how do people know? Could I also maybe spread Russian disinformation?
Yes.
How
you don't know. That's the thing. Is because it's very difficult. Because of the way we've sort of structured a society and being very internet like we've shifted from a mainstream media type society to an information based society, to a much more decentralized but semi decentralized, where you have social media platforms, but you have a number of actors that use these platforms, right? So it's not the same thing. It's not structured quite the same way as it used to be in the United States. There used to be three big television outlets. You had NBC, CBS, and PBS, or like CBS and CBS, or and ABC. Sorry. So you had all of these different television networks that were structured in this way, but they were all sort of like trying to reach a general audience, right? They were trying to cater to everybody, trying to reach as many people. Whereas what's happened with the internet is it's become very narrow and focused. And a lot of that has to do with just sort of how advertising works and how targeted advertising works, right? So by targeting advertising groups, you're able to find your niche audience, but you tailor your messaging for that niche audience. So what happens is that media outlets that are smaller or just content producers are incentivized to share information that already fits within the biases of an identified segment of people, and it creates these feedback loops. So everybody sort of gets into their social media bubbles. And what the Russians were very good at being able to do was identify that this was occurring, and to increase the amount of polarization at speed at which people were engaging with each other and or not really engaging with each other, being mad at each other and just sort of talking over each other's and not talking with each other anymore. And so to sort of being separated and having only the internet to communicate with each other isn't the same as like having a human to human interaction that we would normally expect. So you're able to find these very narrow-based communities, and you're able to convince yourself that that this community is right, and that no, we should not listen to anybody at all ever, And so you only get information that you want to hear. And so Russians and a number of other states, the United States is obviously aware of this as well. So it's this is not a East-West thing. This is just sort of state actor territory. Understands that misinformation and disinformation operations really have to hone in on very targeted groups of people in order to cause them to spread misinformation. And like you said, you don't know, because it's very difficult to verify this information, which is one of the reasons why I don't get my information. I don't get my information from the news. I just don't. I get my information from primary sources, and I talk to people and I ask people, hey, what's going on there? Like with the invasion of Russia, or the invasion of Ukraine, right, by Russia. I didn't get my information from the news. I just got I got my information by talking to people in Ukraine, right?
Or from people observing parking lots.
But not everybody can do that. It is rare. You're not. Yeah.
Yes. So you have been an intelligence analyst. So how do you see the intelligence community then, and how do you see it now?
Everybody left.
What?
Everybody left. All the good people left. So the intelligence agencies are very thin. Mm-hmm. So I think that is the most that is perhaps the most interesting thing that I've seen over the last decade or so, is that most people who were in the intelligence field when I was in are and had a certain skill set have gone into the private sector. They've gone they've sort of gone into other services. They've gone to social, Silicon Valley. Most people that I know are either activists, or they are working working in Silicon Valley for some social media large company like Google, Alphabet, your Alphabet, Meta type companies. So I think that there has been a brain drain from the intelligence agencies. So you have a lot of old people who are careerists, who are retired, and there hasn't been a lot of new people coming in. So I think that intelligence professionals are becoming rarer and rarer as the years go by.
Does that make them more dangerous or less dangerous?
I think it makes corporations more dangerous than intelligence agencies at this point.
So let's go back to the leaks. If you had known what would happen afterwards, would you still act in the same way as in 2010?
Yeah, well, I'm asked this question a lot, and I give the same answer, which is that I can't go back and look at what I knew then and say that I could do anything differently, because the cards I was given I was essentially given a deck of cards of events and how they transpired. Would it have been ideal for me to have the New York Times or the Washington Post publish this information? The simple fact of the matter is I didn't have enough time. It was too complicated. We had so many problems, and I eventually figured it out. And so it got done, and it played out the way it did. Did I expect to go to prison for a significant chunk of time? No. I mean, that was not. Nobody had ever. I think people forget this, that nobody had ever in the United States gone to prison for a leak to the public before. It had never happened. This had never happened before. Dan Ellsberg was threatened with, and I wasn't really even aware of that, with imprisonment. But I was the first person to actually be jailed in pretrial confinement and held for a significant chunk of time. Now everybody sort of knows this because people look at Ed and myself, but beforehand, I didn't have that information beforehand. I didn't know that prison was on the table. I certainly thought the consequences personally were very different. I thought I was going to lose my security clearance, lose my job. I thought, and those are serious things for me. Those are losing your ability to do your job and pursue your career, a career that you spend so much time and effort on, was a big deal to me. But the sort of option of me going to prison hadn't occurred to me. It never occurred to me. It was too outlandish, too extreme.
You have even been kept in solitary confinement for half a year, and then you were 7 years in jail, and then again for refusing to testify.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I have no idea what that grand jury was about. So I don't. There's been speculation that it's about a particular individual. The government told us that it was not specific to any individual, and that but it was connected to the leaks in 2010. So they wanted to ask me questions that I had already answered. So that's the only clarification I have, is that from my perspective, I don't know that it's about a specific individual. I just know that it's about the leaks from 2010.
To put it very short and roughly, you have been in school, then in the army, then in jail, and now you are free. So
I was homeless for a bit there too.
Oh, you're homeless.
Yeah.
Okay. But what does freedom mean to you?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever experienced it, so I don't really.
And now you don't feel free?
No, I don't feel free. I feel like I feel like our society tells us that we're free at times, but what is actually being free? The moments where I've always felt the most free, ironically, are the moments whenever I am captivated the most by sort of the structure of society and things, right? In my head, I feel more free in situations where I have fewer options in my day-to-day life, if that makes sense.
Okay. Julian Assange has been incarcerated in Belmarsh prison since 2019. What's your relationship with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange?
I have no relationship.
Okay.
No, so I don't know. I don't even know with the leaks. Everybody keeps saying that the leaks, that the leaks are him or whatever. But I don't know that. I don't know who I was communicating with. I just know that I uploaded stuff to a person who purportedly worked with WikiLeaks at the time. And I was in communication with a lot of other people too. So I don't know. I don't have a sense of if there is an association or not. So that's all speculation.
So, but you uploaded 700,000 documents, right?
I didn't count them.
Okay. Edward Snowden also lives in exile in Russia since 2013. Have you been influenced by him?
No.
No.
I have not.
Okay. So still many people called you a traitor. What do you respond to them?
What is that? What is treason? Everybody throws this word around. Like, what is, like what, patriotism, treason? I find these words kind of silly, right? Because like everybody's this and everybody's that. Especially if you disagree with somebody, it's just sort of getting thrown out as a term. I don't. These words have lost their meaning to me. So I think that I'm much more focused on like my health, my well-being, my happiness than to worry about what words somebody throws at me.
After your release in 2018, you ran for a Senate seat in Maryland.
I did.
Yes, unsuccessfully. So
hey, I thought we ran a pretty good campaign. I mean, we didn't win, but we tried really hard.
What was your motivation to do that?
My motivation at the time was I wanted to sort of influence. Like I had the sense that that the dialogue, the political dialogue in the U.S. was sort of narrowing. Right, there wasn't a lot of talk about the underlying structures of American society in political discourse at the time. What I wanted to do was I wanted to encourage other people to engage with the idea that you can criticize that you don't always have to be pro-police. You don't always have to be pro-intelligence agency. You don't always have to be pro-military, right? And that's happened. It's sort of become a broader discourse. And I think that is the most successful aspect of this campaign from 2018, was that I was a part of this wave of people who were broadening the number of things that could be criticized within American politics and American society, to the point where now there's a whole debate about defund the police or abolish the police. Like all these different ideas that weren't remotely in the discourse before are at least being talked about.
At the moment, nation states are still the most important political entity. You have served for the USA and then you have been incarcerated by then. How do you see nation states today? So should they be kept? Should there be no governments? Should there be more transnational governments like the EU? Or should there even be some kind of world government?
So I think that the era, and I've said this before, I think that the era of the Westphalian idea, this notion of a nation state, is very much obsolete. And I think that nation states are dissolving before our eyes slowly. I think that the sort of Westphalian notion of a strong nation state, especially federalized and large nation states, is sort of dissolving slowly but surely. And I think the internet has a lot to do with it. I think that the rapidness of industrialization allowed for nation states to become these centralized things. But I think that decentralization, what in the UK is often called devolution, which is the sort of more localized, smaller scale institutions and things like that, and then more physically like existing things like cities, I think I think we're going to enter an era in which we're going to encounter more city states. Like we're going to have where you have a physical entity being sort of these physical intersections being more important than the lines, the sort of areas. It's going to be points that are going to be more important. Points and points on the map, and as opposed to the areas on the map, I think are going to be more significant going further into the 21st century. And I think that there are a number of factors driving that. So I think that it's going to be more important who is in charge of cities in the 21st century than who is in charge of and then who is elected to say I think that the mayor of New York, for instance, will be more significant and more powerful and more significant in a political sense than the president of the United States as we move into the middle of the 21st century.
Speaking of New York, you live in Brooklyn now?
I do.
Yeah, you like it there? Will you stay there?
Yeah, it's all right. I like Brooklyn. Brooklyn's cool. You love it or hate it. You cannot if you insult it or criticize it, I will defend Brooklyn, of course. Since that is just kind of the way it is. But yeah, I like living. I do like living in New York. I do like living in Brooklyn. It is a city that whenever I'm actually living in it, though, I'm like, wow, this city is exhausting. It's so tiring. It's so, and then I leave it, and I'm just like, oh, I miss it so much. So it's a love-hate relationship.
So you're not going to move to Switzerland?
Well, I think moving outside the U.S. is on the table. I think that I've certainly been looking at maybe not living full time in Europe, including Switzerland. I've thought about moving to Paris. I've thought about moving to Berlin. I've thought about living in here as well, especially with NIM. I've thought about having sort of split time between living in the U.S. and living here. Yeah, like I don't think it's off the table.
Chelsea, thank you very much for coming.
Oh, is that it?
Yes.
Wow, that was quick.
Thank you.
All right.